Good day, my friends. We're glad that you've chosen today to study with us from the Holy Word of God. We find that the psalmist said, "The entrance of thy word giveth light. It giveth understanding to the simple." And God's word does give light to us. And this not only means the New Testament, but it means the Old Testament as well. We are to recognize that whatever things were written aforehand were written for our learning, of the patience come to the Scriptures, we might have hope. And the book that we've been studying for several weeks now is a book called Daniel. It is that records dreams that the king Nebuchadnezzar dreamed and visions that Daniel saw. It also records incidences in the life of individuals that showed the faith of these exiles who were hundreds of miles away from their beloved land and city of Jerusalem and Judah. And as we look today, we're looking at just such an incident that Daniel records. In the book of Daniel, in the 3rd chapter, we find the story of 3 men that are called the Hebrew children. Their names were Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego, and they were ones that these were names that were Babylonian names given to them to supplant their Hebrew names. These men had been taken when they were just youth from the land of Judah. They'd been reared in Babylon and trained in the lore and the teachings and the educations of Babylonians, and they stood before King and served at his instructions and commands. We don't know how long it was from the times that the dream of Daniel, or the dream of Nebuchadnezzar, is recorded in Daniel 2. But we do know that while we don't know how long it was between that and the events of the 3rd chapter, that it could have been a long time. Some insist it was 18 years, the 18th year of the reign of Nebuchadnezzar. And if so, that would have been just a year or two before the fall of Jerusalem, and these wouldn't have been used anymore. But while we don't know precisely the time and how soon these two events were related, we do know something. We do know that the character of Nebuchadnezzar has changed little from how and what is revealed in the 2nd chapter and what it's revealed in this 3rd chapter. The 3rd chapter reveals the king as history reveals him, as a man of great pride, of egotistical nature, and of a man of a fierce temper. Nebuchadnezzar, in this 3rd chapter of Daniel, determined he was going to build an image to his God, to one of his gods, for like the pagan around Nebuchadnezzar was a worshiper of many gods. So this image that he determined to make, we don't know precisely what God he intended to honor by that. But it was an expensive venture on his part. It was to be made of gold. It was an object that was 90 feet high. It was 9 feet broad. And whether or not the image was hollow and it was gold-plated, or whether it was solid gold, that we're not told. But we do know that he intended that this should be an object of worship. And when it was to be completed, to all of his servants, his officials, and those that served to him in any capacity, he commanded, "I want you present on the day of the dedication of this image. And I want, whenever it is, that there is the music and all of the different kinds of instruments that make their noise of a melodical nature. I want you to bow down. I want you to worship this image that I've made. If you don't do so," Nebuchadnezzar said, "you will be put in the burning fiery furnace." Now, for most of his officials, that was no big deal. They worshiped many gods, and giving honor to another god, maybe one he already worshipped, because we don't know which god Nebuchadnezzar had dedicated this image to, that it didn't matter if it was just another god, just another day for them. But to these Hebrew children, it did matter, because the God that they worshipped claimed to be the only God. And that God said that I am a jealous God. I'm the Lord thy God. You are to have no other gods before me. You are not to make any image of anything in heaven above or the earth beneath. You're not to bow down to it, and you're not to worship it. And so Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were officials of the king. And when the king demanded his officials to come to the time of the dedication of this image, then Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were expected to be there, and they weren't there. And when the musical instruments sounded, the mass of the people bowed down and gave homage and worshiped this image. That is, all except Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Now these men knew they had nothing to fear from the image. It was made in the likeness of either a human or some animal. But while it was made in the likeness of a man or an animal, and it had eyes, those eyes didn't see anything. It had a nose, but it didn't smell anything. It had ears, but it didn't hear anything. It had a mouth, but it didn't say a word. They knew there was nothing to fear. It was just an expensive piece of metal. But while they knew they had nothing to fear from this image, they knew their king, and they knew they had something to fear from him. And the disobedience of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego came quickly to the attention of the king. He was angry, very angry. He demanded that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego appear before him, and they came. And he said, "Is it of purpose, O Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego, that you've not worshipped my God? I'm going to give you another chance," he said. "I'm going to cause the musical instruments to sound again. And when they do sound, then you bow down and you worship. But if you don't, you're going to be cast into that burning fiery furnace." Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego were respectful. They spake in an honorable way unto the king. But Nebuchadnezzar was trying to rule over a realm. He had no authority. He was trying to rule over their soul and their spirit, and he could not do that. And Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego had heard the king say, "If you don't do it, I'm going to throw you into the fiery furnace. And who's the God going to deliver you out of my hand?" And they said, "O king, we're not ones that we don't need to give any consideration to this matter. We don't need a second chance, O king." He said, "If so be, the God that we worship, he's able to deliver us out of the firing furnace, and he will deliver us out of your hand, O king. But if not, we will not worship that image that you've made." This infuriated even more Nebuchadnezzar. He commanded that the furnace should be heated 10 times hotter than what it ordinarily was. And when it reached that point, and the soldiers and the guards of Nebuchadnezzar grabbed hold of each of these men and thrust them into that fiery furnace, the heat that came out of that furnace was so intense that these soldiers, these officials, were killed. But not so with Nebuchadnezzar, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. They fell into the furnace, but they stood up and they walked around. And to the surprise of the king and to others that we were holding, it looked like there was somebody else in that furnace. And Nebuchadnezzar was astonished. They had not been burned to a crisp. They were able to walk about. It seemed as though there was nothing wrong with them. Their hair was not singed in any way. And so he went as close as he could to that furnace and said, "Come out, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego." And out they came. And as the people looked at these individuals, wonder of wonders, their garments were not singed in any way. Their hair or their head was still intact. There wasn't even the smell of smoke on them at all, these three that came out. And Nebuchadnezzar had his answer. There was a God. that could deliver these individuals out of his hand. And that God needed or knew that Nebuchadnezzar needed a lesson that he surely learned. And to this point, Nebuchadnezzar said to the people, "Blessed be the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who has sent his angel to guard these men while they were in this furnace. And he has delivered them out of the king's hand." Nebuchadnezzar said, "I make a decree that nobody is to speak disrespectful or any way to blaspheme the name of the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego." Now, friends, there is something interesting about all this, and that is we'd met Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego earlier. We'd seen them in company with Daniel, and like Daniel, they had gone through the training for the years that they were there. And they had joined with Daniel as they prayed that God would give to them in dream that Nebuchadnezzar dreamed and the interpretation of that dream. But in Daniel 3, these men are alone. Daniel is not there. He has appeared to be their leader. Is their faith dependent upon his? What's going to happen to these individuals when Daniel isn't there to bolster their faith? Their faith was real, just as genuine as Daniel was. And whether Daniel was there or whether he was absent, their God, in whom they placed their trust, had commanded them, "Don't bow down to the image of another God. I am a jealous God. You don't bow down to them. You don't worship them." They believed him, and they were willing to suffer whatever consequence that the king might give to them. It is a lesson to us. We must learn that we walk by faith and not by sight. We must learn that the righteous and the just live by faith. And we must learn that without faith, it's impossible to please God. He that comes to God must believe that he is, and that he is a rewarder of them that diligently seek him. Remember the story of Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego, men far away in a strange land. Even their loyal and trusted friend Daniel is not there. But wherever we are, if we're servants of God, we know that he is there. Just as David, many centuries before, had written and said, "Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil. Thou art with me." And these men were walking in the valley of the shadow of death. And because they had faith in him and feared no evil, they were willing to take whatever came. So must we be. So that when we stand before God at the final day, that we will be able to look upon that which we believed in and be rewarded, because through our faith to him, we've served him loyally and faithfully. Thank you for listening. We trust that you'll continue to listen as we study in our next session, that they continued steadfastly in fellowship.